Key points. Biden's support for Israel. U.S. President Joe Biden has offered more support to Israel than any previous administration, especially in the context of the ongoing war in Gaza, where tens of thousands of Palestinians, mostly women and children, and U.S. complicity in war crimes. The Biden administration's significant military aid to Israel has enabled the Netanyahu government to sustain its war in Gaza, causing large-scale displacement and casualties. Many observers accuse the U.S. of being complicit in war crimes. Massive military aid. Since the war started a year ago, the U.S. has provided a record $17.9 billion in military aid to Israel, with some figures suggesting the total amount could be even higher due to hidden shipments. This aid includes artillery shells and heavy bombs used in Gaza and other regional operations. Broader regional conflict. U.S. military aid and operations have extended the conflict, impacting other Middle Eastern countries, such as Yemen, where the U.S. has spent $4.86 billion on military campaigns against Houthis who have aligned with Palestinians. Indifference to ceasefire calls. While the Biden administration has occasionally called for ceasefires, there has been no serious attempt to end the violence in Gaza or Lebanon. The U.S. has refused to impose conditions on its aid, despite growing international protests. Congressional support for Israel. Israel has been the largest recipient of U.S. military aid since 1959. The bipartisan support in Congress remains strong, and no U.S. administration has dared to challenge Israel's influential lobby, AIPAC. Netanyahu's influence. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has received strong support from the U.S., despite accusations of war crimes. In July, he was invited to address the U.S. Congress, where he justified his actions in Gaza and rejected a two-state solution. Israeli control over U.S. policy. Analysts and authors argue that Israel exercises significant control over U.S. foreign policy, especially through powerful lobbying groups like AIPAC. This influence ensures unwavering U.S. support for Israel, regardless of which political party is in power. Implications for the Middle East. With no change expected in Washington's support for Israel, the conflict has become a regional issue, raising concerns about a possible Israeli attack on Iran, which could drag the U.S. into a broader, disastrous war. Crux, in simple words. U.S. President Joe Biden has provided more military support to Israel than any previous administration, helping Israel continue its war in Gaza, which has killed tens of thousands of Palestinians. Despite occasional calls for a ceasefire, the U.S. continues to send large amounts of military aid to Israel. Many observers argue that the U.S. is complicit in Israel's actions, and Israel's influence over American foreign policy remains strong due to powerful lobbying groups like AIPAC. With no change expected in U.S. policy, the conflict is escalating, potentially involving other countries in the region, like Iran. Key points. Increasing carbon levels and climate change. For 800,000 years, atmospheric carbon levels stayed below 300 ppm. However, in 1911, carbon levels exceeded this, and today they surpass 425 ppm, leading to rising temperatures and greenhouse gas effects. This impacts human health, especially vulnerable populations like children and pregnant women. Impact on health. Heat waves raise the risk of premature births, which is a leading cause of early childhood death. Children in regions like Pakistan, where summer temperatures exceed 40 degrees Celsius, are particularly at risk. Global heat wave effects. According to UNICEF, 1/3 of all children globally face 4 to 5 heat waves annually, with those living in poverty being especially vulnerable. Rising temperatures and climate change affect food security, air pollution, and overall child health, exacerbating conditions like asthma. Educational disruptions and social impact. Extreme weather, including intense heat and rainfall, leads to school closures and disruptions in education. Children's physical activities are also restricted due to excessive heat, leading to crowded, poorly ventilated indoor spaces, which impact their social and emotional well-being. Urban heat island effect. Major cities like Karachi and Lahore experience higher temperatures due to the urban heat island effect, where concrete and asphalt surfaces trap heat, further intensifying already high temperatures. Inadequate healthcare response. There is a need for hospitals to better equip themselves to treat children affected by heat stroke and respiratory illnesses. Special summer wards and trained staff are crucial to handle the increasing number of young patients affected by extreme heat. Mental health impact. Rising temperatures and climate change lead to increased climate anxiety among children. A study in Pakistan found that extreme weather events cause attachment disorders, depression, anxiety, panic attacks, and learning difficulties. These impacts are more severe for children in poverty-stricken areas. Effects of 2022 floods. The 2022 floods in Pakistan, which affected 33 million people, left lasting trauma in children. Many continue to report anxiety, stress, and sleep disorders due to the flood's devastation. Need for preparedness. While Pakistan alone cannot reverse climate change, there is a need to equip children with disaster preparedness tools to cope with the recurring extreme weather events. This can mitigate some of the psychological and physical impacts they face. Crux, in simple words, climate change, driven by rising carbon levels, poses significant health risks, particularly to children. Heat waves, poor air quality, and extreme weather events disrupt their education, physical health, and mental well-being. Urban areas face even more intense temperatures due to heat island effects, while healthcare systems struggle to cope with the rising demand for treating heat-related illnesses. A study in Pakistan highlights how climate anxiety and trauma from events like the 2022 floods are affecting children's mental health. Preparedness for future disasters is essential to help them handle the growing threats posed by climate change. Key points. Historical background of the tribal areas. Until the passage of the 25th Amendment in 2018, Pakistan's Northwest tribal areas were federally administered. These regions gained global attention following the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 and the US-led coalition's arrival in 2001. Militants were drawn to the area before Pakistan launched military operations. Jinnah's vision for tribal areas. Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah had envisioned the integration of the tribal areas through peaceful means, promoting education and healthcare without disrupting tribal customs. However, after his death, British colonial policies continued in the region, contrary to Jinnah's ideals. Frontier Crimes Regulation (FCR), the FCR law, retained after independence, was a contradictory system. It allowed tribal customs, Pashtunwali, to govern but gave excessive judicial powers to political agents. The FCR isolated the tribal areas from the rest of Pakistan and hindered integration by maintaining a colonial-style administration. The Malik system. Under this British-era system, each tribe was led by a hereditary Malik who acted as the intermediary between the government and the people. This system created a class of elites disconnected from the egalitarian Pashtun traditions and failed to bridge the gap between the people and the state. Administrative reforms and one-unit plan. In 1955, the tribal areas were included in the one-unit plan for West Pakistan, but this plan failed to foster ethnic integration. The dissolution of one unit was welcomed, particularly by the Pashtuns, as it offered stronger ties with the state. Impact of the Afghan War. The Soviet-Afghan War in the 1980s altered Pakistan's strategy in the tribal areas, focusing on strategic interests rather than integration. The conflict brought drugs and weapons to the region, disrupting social structures and weakening dependence on government assistance. 25th Amendment and FATA-KP merger. In 2018, the tribal areas were merged into Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, KP, through the 25th Amendment. This integration was aimed at dismantling colonial-era administrative structures, but it also created new demographic and governance challenges for KP. Challenges and future needs. Despite the merger providing legislative representation and dismantling the FCR, the tribal areas still face challenges such as weak governance, lack of a functional justice system, and inadequate economic development. Addressing these issues is critical to fostering social cohesion and aligning public and state interests. Crux, in simple words, the tribal areas in Pakistan's northwest, historically administered under colonial laws, faced isolation and limited development. Jinnah's vision for peaceful integration was overshadowed by British-style policies that maintained the Malik system and the FCR law. The Soviet-Afghan War further destabilized the region. In 2018, these areas were merged with Khyber Pakhtunkhwa to modernize governance, but challenges remain. Effective integration requires strengthening the justice system, local governance, and ensuring economic development to align state and public interests. Key points: the double standard in reactions to violence. The writer critiques the global response to Israel's actions in Gaza, noting that while it is seen as impolitic to condemn Israel's retaliation without addressing Hamas's attacks on October 7, 2023, the reverse, focusing solely on Hamas's actions while ignoring Israel's response, should also be questioned. Context of Palestinian oppression. The events of October 7th are framed within the broader context of Palestinian dispossession, dehumanization, and bloodshed over the past 75 years, including the 18-year blockade of Gaza. Israeli journalist Gideon Levy highlights the inevitable consequences of confining 2.3 million people in Gaza under inhumane conditions. Atrocities on both sides. The killing and abduction of Israelis in October 2023 are condemned, but the daily suffering of Palestinians in Gaza is also emphasized. While there were exaggerations regarding the atrocities of October 7th, the suffering of Palestinians, including children, is often minimized or justified under the pretext of Israel's right to self-defense. Global complicity. The article argues that the world, especially the US and other Western powers, is complicit in the ongoing violence due to their failure to act against Israeli actions, driven in part by a sense of guilt over the Holocaust. This complicity is seen as enabling ongoing ethnic cleansing and violence. Wider Middle East implications. The conflict is escalating beyond Gaza, with increasing violence in the West Bank and potential broader repercussions, including Israeli action against Lebanon's Hezbollah and Iran. The role of the U.S. in shaping these events, through its negotiations and warnings, is also discussed. Reflections from scholars and historians. Raz Siegel, a genocide scholar, criticizes Joe Biden's rhetoric for using the Holocaust to justify Israeli violence, while historian Ilan Pape views these events as potentially signaling the end of the Zionist project, arguing that the idea of establishing a European Zionist state in the Arab world was flawed from the start. Palestinian perspective. The article ends with a plea from Palestinian poet Mozab Abu Toha, questioning whether Palestinians are destined only to report on their deaths and call for help, urging the global community to wake up to their plight. Crux, in simple words. The article discusses the global double standard in condemning violence by both Hamas and Israel. It highlights the suffering Palestinians have faced over decades and critiques the international community's failure to hold Israel accountable for its actions. The escalating conflict in the Middle East, including Israel's actions in Lebanon and Iran, is also examined. Scholars argue that current events could signal the demise of the Zionist project, and a Palestinian poet calls for the world to recognize their ongoing suffering. Key points: solidarity with Palestine. Pakistan has a long-standing tradition of supporting the Palestinian cause, stemming from both religious and cultural ties. This support spans various political ideologies, including Islamist parties and those on the political left. Multi-Party Conference, MPC. On the one-year anniversary of the Al-Aqsa flood operation, a multi-party conference was held to address Israeli actions in Gaza. Most major political parties, except the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf (PTI), participated. The conference aimed to convey a unified message of support for Palestinians and called for an immediate ceasefire and an emergency summit of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, OIC. Symbolic support. Although the conference was largely symbolic, it represented a collective stance from Pakistani political forces, reaffirming support for Palestinian self-determination and referencing Israeli aggression in Lebanon. Limits of action. While Pakistan has provided moral and diplomatic support, as well as aid shipments to Gaza, the effectiveness of such actions is limited. The OIC has held meetings since October 7th, but has yet to establish a comprehensive policy to address the ongoing violence in Gaza. Historical context. The article notes the failure of the Muslim world to take concrete actions against Israel, contrasting current inaction with the historical use of the Arab oil weapon during the 1970s. PTI's absence. The absence of the PTI at the MPC is highlighted as concerning. In crucial national discussions, it is vital to set aside political differences and demonstrate unity. This absence is seen as an opportunity lost for dialogue between political factions. Call for negotiation. The article emphasizes that political impasses should be resolved through negotiation and dialogue rather than confrontation. It expresses hope that future opportunities for dialogue will not be missed. Crux, in simple words, Pakistan has a rich history of supporting the Palestinian cause across its political spectrum. A recent multi-party conference was held to express solidarity with Palestinians and condemn Israeli actions, though the PTI did not attend, which raises concerns about political unity. Despite moral support and aid to Gaza, there is a lack of concrete action from the Muslim world against Israel. The article calls for political parties to put aside differences and work together in solidarity for Palestine and emphasizes the importance of dialogue to resolve political conflicts. Key points: abolition of the Food Department. The Punjab government's decision to dissolve the old Food Department, plagued by corruption and inefficiency, and replace it with the Punjab Price Control and Commodities Management Department is a significant reform aimed at addressing food inflation. Objectives of the new department. The new department's main goals include regulating supply and demand for key commodities such as wheat, flour, and sugar, controlling food prices and supervising related industries, especially flour and sugar mills, centralizing functions related to food quality assurance, agriculture marketing, wheat procurement, storage, and consumer rights protection, boosting food security. By consolidating various agencies and functions, the new department aims to enhance food security in Punjab, anticipate food shortages and ensure a steady supply, control prices and prevent profiteering in the food market, regulate interprovincial trade of essential commodities. Legislative powers. The department will have the authority to propose and formulate legislation and policies related to food management, which is crucial for its operational effectiveness. Need for centralization. The reform serves as a model for other provinces to centralize their food policies and regulations, making compliance easier for the private sector. Concerns about bureaucratic capacity. Despite the potential benefits of restructuring, there are concerns regarding the bureaucratic capacity to implement these changes effectively. Previous examples, such as the Federal Board of Revenue, FBR, show that restructuring can sometimes lead to deterioration in performance due to bureaucratic hurdles. Lessons from the FBR. To ensure the success of the new department, provincial authorities must analyze past reform failures, like those at the FBR, to avoid repeating the same mistakes and enhance the effectiveness of the food regulatory system. Crux, in simple words, the Punjab government has replaced its inefficient food department with a new one focused on managing food prices and supply. This change aims to help families struggling with rising food costs by centralizing food regulation and ensuring a steady supply of essentials like wheat, flour, and sugar. While the reform is promising, there are concerns about whether the bureaucracy can execute these tasks effectively. Previous attempts at restructuring, such as with the tax agency FBR, have not always succeeded, so it's important for the new department to learn from these past mistakes to avoid similar pitfalls. Other provinces are also encouraged to consider similar reforms. Key points. Global water crisis. A significant water crisis is emerging worldwide, with 2023 being reported as the driest year for rivers in over 30 years by the World Meteorological Organization, WMO. This crisis is characterized by severe droughts in some regions and catastrophic floods in others, largely attributed to climate change. Contrasting weather patterns. Droughts. Areas such as the southern U.S., Argentina, and Central America are experiencing widespread droughts. Floods. Regions in Africa and parts of Asia are facing devastating floods. Pakistan's water challenges. Pakistan is facing similar water extremes, with monsoon flooding damaging urban and rural areas while parts of Balochistan and Sindh suffer from drought conditions. The Indus Basin is at risk due to decreasing river discharges and melting glaciers, threatening long-term agricultural and economic stability. Over-reliance on glacial meltwater. Pakistan's dependence on irrigation from glacial meltwater and unsustainable groundwater extraction raises concerns about the sustainability of water resources, especially with a growing population and acute water shortages. Global and local actions needed. International cooperation. countries must prioritize effective water management, invest in infrastructure to withstand extreme weather, and implement climate mitigation strategies. Improved monitoring and data sharing between nations sharing water basins are crucial for better resource management. Local conservation practices. Individuals should adopt water conservation practices, supported by government incentives to reduce waste. Education on efficient water use is essential to alleviate pressure on water systems. Role of global bodies. Organizations like the UN must advocate for nations to achieve Sustainable Development Goal 6, SDG 6, which aims to ensure access to water and sanitation for all. Urgency of intervention. Without immediate and collective action, the dual threats of floods and droughts will continue to devastate economies and ecosystems globally. Crux, in simple words, the world is facing a serious water crisis, with 2023 being the driest year for rivers in over 30 years. While some places are flooded, others are suffering from drought. Pakistan is also experiencing these extremes, with flooding in some areas and drought in others. The reliance on melting glaciers and groundwater is putting pressure on water supplies, especially with a growing population. To tackle this crisis, countries need to improve water management and invest in infrastructure that can handle extreme weather. Locally, people should practice water conservation, and governments should promote efficient water use. Global organizations must push for better water access for everyone. Urgent action is necessary to prevent further damage to economies and ecosystems.